if I showed you these two phones and I told you one of them was $900 and the other was half the price at $450, would you know which one was which? A lot of people probably wouldn't. And interestingly, Samsung chose to make these two phones look really similar this year, their flagship lineup and their mid-range lineup. So if you guessed right, this is the $900 phone, which is the Galaxy S23 Plus, a part of Samsung's flagship lineup. And the $450 phone right here is the brand new Galaxy A54, a part of Samsung's mid-range lineup. So the similar design got me really wondering which one was actually the better phone to buy. Like obviously the S23 Plus is meant to be the better phone, but does it justify being double the price? And I don't want to give a spoiler here, but I filmed a lot of camera comparisons, and some part of this video will be a camera comparison, and this one actually really shocked me. I expected the S23 to completely destroy the A54, but that was absolutely not the case. So to check myself, I surveyed a few people with blind photo comparisons, and in several photos, the A54 actually won. Now, that's not every photo, but we'll talk about that later on. So starting off with some of the benefits of the Galaxy A54, of course, the first one is a lower price. It's half the price of the S23 Plus and $350 less than the regular S23. There's also expandable storage on here, which you don't get on the flagship lineup, so you can put an SD card in here of up to 1 terabyte. And this has a larger battery considering the size and specs of the phone, so you could expect a really solid battery life on here. Now, getting into the actual comparison, let's start off with the displays. Obviously, the designs look similar on the back, and we'll talk more about the materials in a minute, but the displays are really important. So the S23 has a 6.1-inch display. The S23 Plus, which is this one right here, has a 6.6-inch display, and the A54 is pretty much right between those two with a 6.4-inch display, but it has a larger bezel, which means the overall phone footprint is pretty much the same as the S23 Plus. So this video, I think, is going to be titled Galaxy A54 versus Galaxy S23, like just the regular one, but I really want to showcase both the S23 and the S23 Plus because they are so similar, but the S23 Plus is a little bit more comparable in size, and so it makes for a more interesting one-to-one comparison. But talking about the actual displays, they're both some version of Super AMOLED displays. They're made by Samsung, so it's no surprise that they are incredible displays. They're both 1080p and 120 Hz, so that stacks up similar, but you're getting a little bit better dynamic range on the S23, and you're getting substantially better brightness on the S23. That's going to be a big positive here. If you're out in bright settings, you're talking 1200 nits versus 1000 nits, and the S23 can go up to a peak of 1750, substantially brighter than the A54. Now, another big positive with the S23 is that they don't have this obnoxious ring around the camera. I don't know why Samsung always does this with the A lineup, but they have a metal ring that, I always see it, especially when the screen's not on. It catches the right glare, and it's just, why do they add that metal ring around the front-facing camera? I really don't know. Underneath the displays, though, they both have optical fingerprint sensors, and again, this is going to be an advantage for the S23. I promise this video is not all advantages for the S23, but this is another one right here. You have an ultrasonic fingerprint sensor on the S23, which is better if your hands are wet, or if they're, it's just more accurate, it's faster, it's more secure, whereas you have an optical fingerprint sensor on the A54, and in addition to that, it's kind of located awkwardly lower on the phone. I don't know why they like to move it down, maybe for a larger battery and other components on the inside, but regardless, I don't really like it being down there. As far as the build quality goes, they are both glass this year, which is a big positive. In the past, a lot of mid-range phones have had a plastic back, which historically is something people complain about, but the A54 has a glass back now. That was the first thing I noticed when I took it out of the box. It really does feel a lot more premium than the previous A-series phones, and I was really happy to see that. It is Gorilla Glass 5, so slightly less durable than the Gorilla Glass Victus 2 on the front and back of the S23, and the water resistance on them, again, something that we didn't always see on mid-range phones, is now IP67 on the A54, and IP68 on the S23. Now, as a quick side note, if you're new here and haven't yet subscribed, I'm coming out with a video talking about the entire Samsung ecosystem very soon. So if you're getting a Samsung phone, you probably want to see that video. Be sure to click that subscribe button so you don't miss it. Otherwise, the colors are a little bit more vibrant on the A54 lineup, a little bit more muted on the S23 lineup. But I will say one thing that this video can't really capture, you can't really see it until you hold the phone, and maybe it's just this one in particular, but the tolerances feel a little bit less tight on the A54, and what I mean by that is the edges, the rails all the way around, kind of protrude a little bit on the back and the front. So if you run your finger over the edge, you kind of feel a slight lip, like a little bit of a lip there. And again, that kind of just shows the tolerances aren't quite as tight on this, which means they're probably going with cheaper tooling, which makes sense for a cheaper phone. And ultimately, most people are putting a case on anyway. Under the hood, we have a very different processor with these phones. Of course, you have the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 on the S23, which is going to be much faster and much more powerful than the A54. But let's get into a quick little, like, I don't know, there's benchmarks and things you could do. What I like to do is just show like an app opening test, kind of just a general benchmark for how fast the processors actually are when you're using the phone every day, opening apps and stuff like that. So as you can see, the S23 is faster, and the more you do with this phone, the more you're going to notice that it definitely is faster. The A54 doesn't necessarily feel slow, but you can definitely tell when you're using it. It's certainly not a flagship, and it definitely is in a mid-range speed. Now, as far as the battery goes, this is going to be an advantage for the Galaxy A54. I mean, I hate battery comparisons because it's so hard to simulate and do it exactly one-to-one throughout the day and do the same stuff. But I find that the A54, with its 5,000 milliamp hour battery, does last longer. You have lower display requirements because it's not as bright. You have a less demanding processor. It's not being as fast, of course. And you have that larger battery. So for most people out there, you should be outlasting the S23 for most uses. But now I want to get into the camera comparison. Like I said, this is really what I thought was going to be an absolute landslide going for a win on the S23. But I found that it actually wasn't as different as I expected. So starting off, we have a 50 megapixel main sensor on the back of both of them. Of course, they're going to bin it down to a 12 megapixel photo. And as you can see, great contrast, really nice colors. They both look really similar. This photo of my Canon camera right here, you can leave a comment and let me know which one you think looks better. But in general, the A54 does like to add a little bit more contrast and sometimes a little bit more saturation. Looking at this photo of these tiny tomato plants, I was really testing the dynamic range there. You get a little bit of a haloing effect around the top of the tomato plants and that tree in the background. But again, they both did a pretty similar job in my opinion. Going to a low light photo, they both do have night mode. And again, they look pretty similar until you zoom in on this black guitar on the right, which you see, substantially more detail on the S23. Going to some other outdoor shots, you can see this photo of a small flower here. Again, you're getting a little bit more contrast, which to some people looks better on the A54. This photo of a flowering tree, just kind of with the sky in the background, almost indistinguishable with the difference here, but you're getting a lot of daylight here, so it's very bright. It's not really a surprise that they both do a good job here. Bright daylight really does make it easy for pretty much any camera out there. However, when you start to zoom in, there is a very obvious difference. You have a 10 megapixel telephoto lens on the S23, and you have no telephoto lens on the A54. So the A54 maxes out at 10x zoom, and that's all digital. And you can see right here, 10x zoom, looking at this photo of a bird. It's not even close. The S23 wins by a landslide. Now, a lens that the A54 has that the S23 doesn't have is a macro lens. That's what that third lens is, which in my opinion, you might as well just get rid of that. It's just there for aesthetics. You can see the A54, I took a macro shot of this little pink flower. And then on the S23, I just used the telephoto lens and zoomed in on that same flower. And it looks better, in my opinion, on the S23. All right, so checking out the video capabilities, they're both able to film 4K 30, as you can see right here, but you're able to get 4K 60 on the S23, and you can also get 8K 24 on the S23. Neither of those are available on the A54. Otherwise, some pretty similar colors. The stabilization is definitely better on the S23, as you can see right here. But like I said, overall, similar video capabilities. In addition, the portrait mode was definitely better because you have a more powerful processor. On the S23, you can see better edge detection here, a cleaner cutout, and the portrait, just like a selfie front-facing shot, I found that this was actually pretty different, and I was getting a much better shot, more accurate shot out of the S23, while the A54 really over-sharpened things, dropped the blacks a lot, and made it like a much, I don't know, just made me look darker and more almost cartoony. Like, it didn't quite look accurate to me. Also, inside these phones, they're both starting at 128 gigabytes if you're talking about the S23 and the A54, but the S23 Plus starts at 256 gigabytes, so if you're spending that extra $100, at least you get extra storage. Kind of summarizing here, the pros of the S23. You're getting wireless charging. That, to me, is a huge, huge positive because I have wireless chargers around, I set it on my desk, and I never have to like actively plug in my phone. It's just always topped off because when it's sitting on my desk, it's charging. In addition, you have a much more powerful processor, which makes it snappier when you're playing games, obviously, or just opening apps and day-to-day stuff. You also have a brighter display on here, and you have generally better cameras, but more so in your fringe situations. Like if you're zoomed in, if it's darker, if things are moving, if you need video, those fringe situations definitely better on the S23 and the S23 Plus. But for just regular outdoor shots, the A54 really surprised me. It kind of goes toe-to-toe for a lot of those high, bright daylight shots, and in my opinion, it was more than passable. Okay, so big conclusion here. It's not really like a one-to-one comparison. You're talking about a flagship versus a mid-range, of course. So the S23 all around is a better phone. The question is it worth that extra money? And I think this is a really weird choice for Samsung to make, because if I was buying the S23, I would feel like I'm not actually getting anything special here. I would feel like the A54 does most of what the S23 does, but when you're actually using it, like, yes, it is faster, it's better at, the cameras and stuff like that, but it doesn't give you that nice confidence of having a distinctively flagship phone. Whereas the opposite can be said for the A54. If you're buying a mid-range phone, you can be more confident than ever that you're getting a really good phone that in many situations is comparable to flagships out there. So that's my take on the A54 versus the S23. Of course, they're two completely different categories, but it's so interesting to me how similar Samsung made them this year. Leave a comment below and let me know what your thoughts are on the S23 and the A54. If you enjoyed the video, consider liking and subscribing. I'm Mike O'Brien, and I'll see you in the next one.